Hello everyone. In this video, I'll demonstrate how to detect Amazon Web Services S3 buckets which can be accessed by anyone on the internet. Prerequisites: Splunk should be receiving Amazon Web Services, that is AWS CloudTrail logs. Let's understand what is AWS policy. Remember this part: P, A or C. Principle: an entity that is allowed or denied access. Let's say Amazon IAM user who wants to have access on S3. In this case, Amazon IAM user will be the principal. Action: type of access that is allowed or denied, defined in effect here. Action can be capability like get object, which the principal will have. This is again depends on effect. If effect says allow, get object will be allowed by the principal, or if effect says deny, then the principal will not have get object capability. Resource: the Amazon resources the action will act on which AWS resource the principal can have capability defined in action. Resource can be S3 or EC2 or Lambda or SQS, etc. That is any AWS service. Condition: the conditions under the access defined is valid. Condition can be like allow principal to perform the action on resource if the source IP is X or browser is Chrome, or if the principal has enabled two-factor authentication. These are few examples of conditions. Sample S3 policies. Both the policies left side and right side effect is allow. Both the policies will allow any principal because star is specified. Star represents any. Left side policy allows only two actions, that are S3 get object and S3 get object version on the resource specified. Right side policy allows any action on S3 on resource specified under resource. Both policies allow any principal to perform actions specified on resource, that is S3 named doc-example-bucket. The first screenshot right side shows how put bucket public access block event looks like when block public access is turned off. The second screenshot right side below shows how put bucket policy looks like when bucket is exposed to public. These are two different S3 bucket policies. The left side, it shows that bucket is exposed to public, but any user can perform only these two actions. The right side, the same bucket is exposed to public, but the user can perform any action on this S3 bucket. Logic to detect S3 buckets that are exposed to public. If effect is allow, principal is star, which means any, and action is S3 colon get object or S3 star, which means any action on S3 from put bucket policy event, and block public policy equal to false, and ignore public ACLs equal to false, and restrict public buckets equal to false from put bucket public access block event. Then the bucket is accessible by public, otherwise it's not accessible by public. Why to detect the S3 buckets that are exposed to public? Most of the Amazon Web Services data breaches have been occurred due to S3 policy misconfigurations. Maybe the DevOps team or cloud admins made these buckets available public when initially created. Later, sensitive data is uploaded to these buckets but forgot to review S3 bucket policy. Detecting the S3 buckets that are exposed to public and get its permissions reviewed by bucket owners will reduce data breaches that have been occurring due to S3 policy misconfigurations. Reviewing of these S3 bucket permissions is useful to set right permissions. Let me show the SPL which detects the S3 buckets that are exposed to public. Before doing that, please note that There are other ways to make the S3 bucket available to public, but in this video, I'll only focus on detecting S3 buckets exposed through S3 bucket policy to public. The SPL can only detect S3 buckets that will be exposed to public because logs are flowing to Splunk now. The search will not be able to detect S3 buckets that were exposed to public because the old changes might not be available in Splunk. The reason could be CloudTrail logs collection is just started and Splunk has not collected old CloudTrail logs. Let me open Splunk. This is the SPL to detect S3 buckets which are exposed to public. I have CloudTrail logs in index called CloudTrail. I'm looking at read-only equal to false, which means I'm ignoring read-only events, and I'm only looking into these two event names, put bucket public access policy or put bucket policy. In the second line, I'm using spath command to assign user identity.arn to a new field called user identity arn and request parameters.bucket name to a new field called bucket name and request parameters.public access block configuration to public access block configuration field. Under request parameters.public access block configuration, this is the child JSON, and I'm assigning this complete JSON to a field called public access block configuration. In the same way, under request parameters.bucket policy, this is the bucket policy. I'm assigning this complete bucket policy to bucket policy field here in the output equal to bucket policy. In the stats, I'm taking latest timestamp and latest source and latest user identity ARN and latest public access block configuration and also latest bucket policy by bucket name. The reason why I'm taking latest public access block configuration and bucket policy because there could be an event where bucket policy is used to expose bucket to public, and later there is a new event has been created not to expose that bucket to public. So in this case, if I don't take the latest bucket policy, this would result in false positive. So that's the reason I'm always looking at the latest bucket policy and the latest public access block configuration to see what is the current configuration in AWS S3 policy. I'm using bucket name in by clause so that I can get all these attributes based on the bucket name. Here in the next command, I'm inputting public access block configuration to spath to expand the objects inside this public access block configuration field. Let's see how it looks like. So this is one of the sample event which doesn't have public access block configuration is fine because it won't be treated as bucket which is exposed to public. Let's look at the another bucket here that is called xyz-customer-contracts, which has got public access block configuration. When we give this public access block configuration as an input to spath command, it will expand all the attributes inside. For example, there are attributes like xmlns, restrict public buckets, block public policy, block public ACLs, ignore public ACLs. You see all of these objects or attributes as a new field here. Block public ACLs, block public policy, ignore public ACLs, and XMLNS. The reason for doing this, I want these attributes or fields to understand whether this bucket is public or not. Let's go back to our search. Let's see what is the next command. In the same way, I have added bucket policy as an input to spath to expand all the attributes inside the bucket policy. As you see here, this is the bucket policy. I want to extract all the fields so that I can use those attributes or fields in my search later. I renamed statement open curly braces and closed curly braces dot star as star because let me show you this one. When I expanded bucket policy using spath, it has created many fields. There is a field called statement open curly braces and closed curly braces dot something something. To use these fields further, I want to simplify these field names. I don't want statement open curly braces and closed curly braces added to each and every field in my next search results. That is the reason I used rename to remove statement open curly braces and closed curly braces. Under the next command, I have eval. What I'm doing here, I'm combining different field names of same attribute. For example, if you see here action and action open curly braces and closed curly braces. The reason for doing this, let me show you. If you see here in the first event in the action field got value, but here under the action open curly braces and closed curly braces there is no value. When we define the S3 policy, there are two ways of defining action. We can directly write action in S3 policy without using a list. If you use a list, as you see here, there is an action attribute. Under action attribute, the actions are specified in a list format. That's when you see these actions under action, open curly braces and closed curly braces. So there are chances of having action either of these fields. That's the reason I used collapse function here to combine these two fields of same attribute. In the same way I have done for principal and effect as well. Let's go to the next command. Here we have a public access field which is going to be created based on the condition. This is the main condition to detect whether the S3 bucket is exposed to public or not. You see here the first attribute I'm looking at is effect. If effect is allow and principal is star, which means any, and action is S3 colon get object or S3 colon star, which means any action can be performed on S3, and block public ACLs equal to false and block public policy equal to false and ignore public ACLs equal to false and restrict public buckets equal to false. These four things are coming from put bucket public access block event. Let's remove this one and see how many buckets are there and how many are exposed to public. Let's see the public access field to understand. If public access says yes, which means bucket is exposed to public. If public access equal to no, which means bucket is not exposed to public. As you see here, test-cloudtrail-logs-int, the value of public access is no for this bucket, which means it's not exposed to public, and xyz-customer-contracts is also not exposed to public because public access value is no. And there are three buckets: xyz-customer-details, xyz-customer-doc, xyz-customer-sales, whose public access value is s, which means they are exposed to public. Let's apply filter here, such public access equal to s, and rename user identity ARN as user. And to make it in a structure, I used table command and specified the list of fields which I'm interested in. And I also did sort based on time in a descending order. The minus represents descending order. Let's search. There are three buckets which are exposed to public and we have detected them. Thank you so much for watching this video.